Hello, my creative friends. Today I'm going to be showing you how I drew and painted this sweet little St. Patrick's Day bunny. For those of you who might like to have a tracer, I do have a sketchbook membership. I'll include that link down inside of the description box. It's very easy to join, very reasonably priced, and I'd love to have more creative friends join me. I so appreciate those who support my page by doing so. But let's go ahead and I'll show you how I give you a simple idea of how to start this drawing. The body is an egg shape, so I start with an egg shape, and that's going to be his chest and the building part of his bottom. That's how I start out that way. And then his legs are kind of that rectangle shape. One's off to the front, kicking outwards, and one of his legs is going to go backwards. Each of them are just kind of rectangle shapes. You create that Y shape or that V shape down below. For the arm, it's similar to what the legs are. It's going to just be that rounded shape that comes out past his body. And then for his head, I draw an egg that is sideways. And once I have the head on in the proportion that I want, I go ahead and put his ears in. Now he has one ear that's facing the back, and then he's got one ear that's in the front, and you're going to see the inside of that ear. I do put some clothes on him, a collar, he's going to have pants and a pocket to have some carrots in, and he's going to have a big old bunny tail in the back. His feet are bunny feet, so they're going to be rather large, so I just build them up with these big shapes and then figure out how I want to place them. I do put a hat on my bunny as well. I put in just a simple face. His mouth is slightly open. And then it's just a little V shape for his eyes. And I just put a little hat on the top of his head. Do whatever you would like to do. I'm doing kind of a shortened little, it's not really a top hat, but he's looking kind of stylish. He's going to have a little clover come out of his hat. Or a shamrock, I guess, is what I'm drawing. That's the basic building blocks I used to create this rabbit. Now I know not everyone likes to draw and you'd rather just jump right on into painting. Well, head on over to my Ko-fi page and check it out for the sketchbook membership. I like to use tracers as well. It does make a quick job of the drawing process and you can get right on into painting if that's what you like. Everyone enjoys different things. Some people like to sketch and draw and others just would like to paint, and that's okay too. Here I'm showing you how I created some of the font process of all the lettering. When doing this font process, you want to copy some of the same letters and style of lettering throughout your little verse. It's also really fun of how you can run your lettering up and around your image, creating some movement inside of your painting. You want to trace over your letters with your marker before you paint because you're going to have to erase the pencil underneath if you've traced it. If you wait until after you've got it painted, especially with watercolor, that pencil mark will be trapped underneath there. So it's best to go ahead and do your lettering first with an archival ink pen, and the micron pens work really well for that because once they're dry, they're permanent. Then you can go ahead and put your watercolor on top. You can also use a Sharpie marker too. Just make sure that they're very dry before you start your watercolor process. If you're using acrylic paint, you don't necessarily have to worry about it so much. You're just probably going to be putting your lettering on top of your acrylic paint once it's done. Now I'm using watercolor paint, so it's the same as we always go through the steps of you start light and bright and then work your way darker. When you're painting watercolor, you're painting the shadows. So this first layer is my brightest, lightest color, and then I'm going to be working darker. It's just the opposite of what acrylic paint is. If you choose to paint this cutie with acrylic paint, you're going to start with your darker colors and then layer your lighter ones on top. So for my watercolor, I'm starting out with a very light color. The green is called yellow green, and I'm using a purple called violet. I do add quite a few other details, so I'm adding some polka dots to his collars. I'm going to be adding some stripes to the bottoms of his cuffs and on the cuffs of his shirt as well. For For his little hat, I wanted kind of a soft gray color. I'm using black to create this color and using the white paper to help create the gray color. But when you use black, you want to make sure you have a lot of water in your paint before you put it on your paper. Tap it on your paper towel too to see if it's not so dark. You definitely want to have a lot of water in there, so it's going to be lighter shade of gray instead of so black. With watercolor, it's easier to add. You can always add more layers. It's harder to take them away. If you do get too dark right away, you can always blot your color with your paper towel and try to pick some up that way. Or go ahead and wet your paintbrush again and use some clear water, go over the top of it, wet the area, and then take your paper towel and try to pick some of the color up. I was going to be making a brown bunny, so I was going to be choosing a red brown and then more of a darker burnt brown color. The red brown I was using was called burnt sienna, and the darker brown color I was called burnt brown. That's what my colors are called in my set. With watercolor, I always just encourage people to buy just a little bit better paper, and I use the Canson paper, which is still considered a student grade. It's 140-pound watercolor paper, but I really do like this paper because it can withstand some extra water layers. It doesn't have any large bumps on it. It's a little bit smoother. It's just a great all-around paper. And then just buy the watercolors that you can afford. Watercolor is just like acrylic paints. There's all different price points of watercolor. The set I'm using today is called Paul Rubens. It is considered a professional grade, but when I first started doing watercolor, honestly, I was using Crayola markers is what I was using. Yes, you can paint with Crayola markers. All you do is take a marker, rub it on a surface that's hard, create a patch of color, then put some water on it, make a puddle of color, and then you have watercolor. So don't let it stop you that if you don't have the best of watercolor to paint watercolor. You can always upgrade and buy more expensive things as you learn how. This style of painting I look at as being relaxing, learning a new skill, and it's really nice just to be able to take out one pan of color, a piece of paper, and be able to paint something. I don't have to take out a whole bunch of colors. I can just take out one pan of color and a piece of paper and I'm ready to go. And at this stage of the game, I really like that. It's not a lot to have sitting out all the time. And then when I store it, I just have one bag that I always keep my watercolor in, and it travels with me. I often take it to work with me and paint on my breaks when I have on my lunch break. Well, he's coming together nicely. Now I'm switching down to a darker green, and I'm going to be painting in a few of the green shadows. So that back leg is going to be darker than the front leg, so I'm going to be adding a little darker color there. The tummy area would be a little darker, and the back part of his backside would be a little darker. That front leg is going to be the lightest shade of green. Well, I'm going to speed this up just a little bit, and I'll pop in on and off to give you some more information as I'm painting. But you'll be able to see the colors building up as I'm going. And again, I'm starting light and then working my way, most likely medium, and then adding my darkest colors after that. So let's continue on. If you're new to watercolor and you haven't done it before, one of the important things to remember is that when you're putting on your colors, you want to give a little time for the watercolors to dry in between putting on your different colors. Watercolor always wants to travel where the paper is wet, so if I put my purple on and then immediately went ahead and put my green on, my green would run into my purple because that area is already wet, and that would make kind of a brown color. So to keep your colors more separated and a little bit more clear, you want to give a little bit of time in between your areas to dry, and then go ahead and layer your colors on. Now this is a student grade paper, so it dries fairly quickly. If you're using a paper that is more cotton or 100% cotton, that's going to take more time to dry. But this is a student grade, so it dries fairly quickly, and I can go from one color to the next fairly easy. If you're new to watercolor as well, you don't necessarily need a watercolor brush to do this painting. Although with these small little paintings, round brushes really do work well. I like to use the Princeton brand. It's got a nice sharp tip on it. This one is considered it's the Velvet Touch Princeton brushes. And a number 6 and a number 10 are the brushes that I use mostly. And they have a nice little tip on them. They bounce back to the shape fairly easily, and they'll last you a long time. That's the one thing about watercolor. It washes out very easily on your brushes, and you'll be able to keep your set of brushes for a very long time. Those little round circles in there, those are the carrots. So those are going to be shades of orange. And that's his little tail I'm working on, so I'm adding some browns in there. Now I'm going to be adding a rosy cheek to his face, so I'm taking just a tiny bit of orange and mixing it with a little bit of red, cadmium red light, to add a little blush of pink on his cheeks. I also put that little blush inside of his ears as well. Adding a little bit darker green to those shamrocks. And then checking my colors as they dry. Are they dark enough? I definitely want contrast in my painting. Sometimes I'll let it dry, take a picture of it in black and white, and see if it's looking like there's enough contrast. If everything's the same color, it's going to be flat looking and it won't have the same interest. So by taking a picture of it in black and white, you're going to be able to see if there's enough contrast in your painting. To create the little grass at the bottom, I just pick up a variety of the greens that I've already used, and I swipe them horizontally back and forth underneath his feet. I'm going to want to add a shadow underneath his feet to make it look like it's anchored, but I let it dry for just a little bit to see how dark I'm getting. Here I'm putting on some clear water first, and then I'm taking some of the green paint, the darker version, and adding it to the edges, and then touching some of the areas on the inside where the paper is wet. Then I load my brush with a little darker of the paint, and I splitter splatter just a little bit of that paint while my paper is still wet in the background, and that's going to create some darker dots in the background. But they're going to be softer because the paper is still wet. Now I've changed up my brush to a very small one. It's probably a size 0 brush. The numbers wore off on my brush, so I can't really see it. I'm using some of the darkest green. I don't have a lot of water in my brush. It's mostly pigment. And that's what I'm going to be using to make the tick marks on his pants, and also do a little line work for the shamrock to add that dark green on there. This is where I'm going to give my paper a dry with my heat tool and then check my colors to see if I need to darken up anything. After it dried, I could tell that I needed to add more contrast to my purple, so I picked up the purples and added a shadow underneath the arm, on the back, and then on the chest. I did add just a little bit more purple on his arm to give it a little bit more rich color, but I still wanted that front arm to be the lightest. I ended up picking up a little bit more of that rosy color and added it to his cheeks and into the inside of his ear. Too funny. Inside of his ear. And then I wanted to add some tops of the carrots, so I used my little brush again and added some color to the top of the carrots. Now you could add that green in with a gel pen if you decided you wanted to do some of the line work that way with gel pens. Those work great too. I was going to be adding some pen work to this painting, and I was going to be using the Micron pen in a 01. I like using that small little tip to create this final bit of sketching on my paintings. When I'm doing the sketch process, I'm not looking to outline my things perfectly like in color book style, but rather I'm going to be using some wiggly jiggly lines, doubling up on my lines, and also doing some continuous line work, which means basically I put my pen down, keep it down, and don't pick it up until I'm all the way around my item. And that just creates some double line work and some irregular lines. I really like the way this looks, but you could always leave this step out and keep your painting just as a watercolor painting, and that would look great too. I just happen to like doing this little bit of sketch work on top of my paintings. For me, I like the whimsical look, and I think this irregular lines really adds that extra character and that whimsical character to my paintings. To create some white lines in this painting, I was going to be using my uni ball pen and white ink. I really do like using this pen. It's got a great metal tip on it, and the ink inside is slightly more opaque than any other pen I've used. A good tip, though, is to only buy one, use it up before you buy another one. It seems that these pens tend to dry out if you're not using them. So buy one, and then when it's out, buy another one. As a final little element, I took a marker from the Deco Color in gold and added some gold little dot clumps, like 3 together in a row to make a little pattern inside of the background. And I'm going to be doing some scroll work as well. I decided to add a little bit more grass at the bottom just to darken it up and add that contrast that I was talking about. I add a few more of those scrolls around the edges just to finish off the edging. And he's just about finished, and I think he's turning out cute as can be. Well, let's take a look at what this guy looks like hanging up in my studio. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching this festive fella come together. If you liked watching this video, here's a couple more you might want to check out. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, and hopefully you'll come back and see me again. And next time, you'll create right along with me.